Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chronic Fatigue and Burnout Recovery podcast. Today, I wanted to answer a question that actually came through my Instagram stories on the weekly Q&A I do on Instagram. And I did answer this question on Instagram at the time, but I thought it was also a really great question for a deeper conversation on this podcast. So the question was very specific, and it was 3 reasons why people don't improve in their chronic fatigue recovery journey, their energy limiting condition recovery journey, whatever you want to call it. Why don't people see improvements, whether they have chronic fatigue or long COVID or some other energy limiting condition? What are the reasons why I see that people don't move forward with their health? And I've got 3 things that I wanted to share with you today. And I guess saying first and foremost, this is not about criticizing people or making things wrong. It's about being able to identify patterns in people's behavior and the patterns that I'm seeing that are keeping people stuck. I think one of the most frustrating things for me as a practitioner is when I'm sitting on the other side of the client consultation and I can see very clearly what's happening and what's going on. And obviously, I'm there to support the client and to guide them through a particular process. But sometimes I can't get them to see what I'm seeing. Because if I go in too aggressive and I'm just like, what you're doing wrong is blah, 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 that's going to cause their system to shut down and resist possibly even further. But if I'm too gentle and too nurturing, I'm potentially just re-nurturing the dysfunctional patterns or the things that are keeping someone stuck. So it's always like this very, very delicate dance of how do we find a way in for this person? And ultimately, as you'll probably pick up as we go through the episode, everything comes back to the nervous system. Because the reason why people are behaving in a certain way or doing things the way that they're doing things or approaching things the way that they're approaching things is down to how their nervous system has learned to cope and survive and the intelligence that's really got them this far. But in order to heal, in order to move forward, in order to have a different experience of life, what we really need to do is change. And in order for us to change, we have to have enough safety in our nervous system to embrace the discomfort of change. And so one of the things that actually holds people back and keeps people stuck in their recovery journey is not having enough embodied safety to embrace the changes that are being asked of them. And those could be any changes from nutrition changes from routine changes, or bigger picture behavioral changes and how we care for ourselves and how we show up with others, the boundaries that we set, and everything else in between. So the current that runs through the whole journey, whether you're working on more practical aspects of your health or your nervous system specifically, is creating more of an embodied sense of safety so that we have the capacity to make the changes which are required. So as we go through this episode, I'm not only going to be talking about the nervous system, I'm going to be talking about other things too. But I wanted to touch on that piece of the nervous system because it's something that I really respect, is that every single person is exactly where they need to be in their journey right now. And the thing that even though it might be frustrating to be stuck, it might be frustrating to not be seeing progress, it might be frustrating to not be moving forward and getting more of your life back, it's understanding that your body is doing the best that it possibly can with the resources that you have. So my intention for today with sharing some of these reasons why people get stuck or don't improve is not to criticize. I really respect the intelligence behind these reasons, but hopefully through some awareness that you get from listening to this episode, it will invite that change inside of you. So let's go into the different reasons. The first reason why I see people not improving in their recovery journey is blind spots. We all have blind spots. I even have blind spots. We all experience things that we don't know, or we all have an experience that there are things we don't know that we don't know. And when there are things that really need to be changed, whether those are things on a physiological level, physiological imbalances in the body, or potentially behavior patterns or coping mechanisms of the nervous system, we all have things that we maybe aren't aware of. And if we could change those things, that could be something that would propel our journey forward and help us improve and help us move forward in our healing experience. Sometimes there are just things that we don't know. And if we don't know what needs supporting, how can we begin to support ourselves? So things that often come up in practice might be things like mold illness and mycotoxins. That was one of the blind spots that I had in my own healing journey. I didn't know I had all these mycotoxins in my body, and that was the reason why every single time I tried to exercise, I was feeling worse and worse. But it could be something else for somebody else. Sometimes I work with clients who are still living in a moldy home and they don't realize it. So, for example, I've had clients who, I've asked them and they're like, no, we've just had this renovated, we've just had this done, we've just had that done. And my gut sense has been like, I don't think this has been done properly. And then when we've investigated further, there still has been an ongoing issue. There could be digestive imbalances, gut infections. Sometimes there's parasites. Sometimes I'll do a parasite cleanse with a client and then they have a big lift in their energy levels afterwards. And this is perhaps even when they haven't necessarily tested positive on stool testing. There might be nutritional deficiencies. I do a lot of nutritional testing with my clients, and time again, especially if they're new to working with a practitioner or they're new in the process with me, we will see lots of nutritional deficiencies. Not in everyone, but in many, many people, I do see this. There can also be things like low levels of glutathione, which I kind of class in the nutrient deficiency category. I've had some clients that glutathione IV, intravenous glutathione, has been the only thing that has given them traction. And unless that was something that was tested for and then actually addressed through IV versus supplementation, they could have just stayed stuck for a very long time, if not forever. Oxalates. Recently, or maybe not so recently now, I did an episode on oxalates and chronic fatigue. And of course, oxalates aren't necessarily something that everybody has to be mindful of. But then people have written to me after that podcast and just said, I wish I had known that I needed to cut out oxalates sooner, because when I did, it made all the difference. Then other things, for example, I've had clients who I've encouraged to investigate for sleep apnea. And then they realize that this is just a really, really big part of their clinical picture that they hadn't recognized before. Or anemia. Sometimes there can be anemia which isn't necessarily getting picked up on your general doctor's blood screen, and this needs to be addressed. Or gluten intolerance. Sometimes people also say they felt so much better or their symptoms really improved when they gave up gluten. There are potentially lots and lots and lots of different physiological reasons why things can get stuck. And that kind of creates a little bit of a double-edged sword, because sometimes we do need to investigate, we do need to uncover these blind spots so that we can address them, because in some cases addressing them is really, really what we need to do. But sometimes considering all the physical blind spots can create its own problems. And this is something I'll go into in a moment, but there is a pattern I see with some people, not all people, where they're not seeing progress and then they're continuously looking for what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Do I need to test for Lyme? Do I need to test for heavy metals? Do I need to test for this thing and that thing? And in the constant search of trying to find out what's wrong, they either get distracted from doing what is within their capacity to do in this moment and focusing on how they can care for themselves in the here and now. And then secondly, this constant searching is like a hypervigilance in the system, which is very destabilizing for the nervous system. So we need to find that balance of doing appropriate investigations, but then also settling into ourselves and settling into our system and trusting the process. The final thing I'd also like to say here when we talk about blind spots is that sometimes what I see is that people have done some therapy, they've done some EDMR, they do yoga nidra, they meditate, and they think that they've got their nervous system covered. As a somatic experiencing practitioner, what I see time and time again is that when we work somatically in the body, using specifically somatic experiencing, which is different to just general somatics, we really uncover a much deeper layer of the nervous system, and we really begin to access some of the embodied dysregulation that hasn't been touched into through these other practices. Yes, all these other types of therapies can be really helpful and supportive, and maybe they're exactly what someone needs in the moment. But as a somatic experiencing practitioner, we're trained to track our clients' nervous systems. We have sat for hours watching human bodies and watching for signs so that we can read, is this person in fight? Is this person in flight? Is this person in freeze? And through our attunement to the people that we work with, we can really tell what is going on in someone's system. And so every single client that I sit in front of, whether it's on a group call in the Nurturing Resilience membership, or whether it's a one-on-one client and we're talking about stool test results, or whether I'm in a fully focused somatic session, I am tracking their nervous system. And I can probably tell, for the most part, more about their nervous system than they can. And so very often what I see keeps people stuck in their healing journey is not acknowledging, or possibly just not being ready for, the deeper work that needs to happen on their nervous system. And it's so frustrating to me because sometimes I'm working with someone and they're very, very focused on the physical components like diet, supplements, stool testing, whatever it might be. They're on board with that, but I can't really get them on board with the somatic side. But inside of me, there's this deep knowing, like, this is what this person needs, but they can only meet that when they're ready. And I also appreciate that if you don't know what somatic experiencing is, and through the name somatic experiencing, it is something that is best understood through experience, you have no concept of what it can do for you. But what I can tell you, and if you can trust me, is that it can do amazing things for you. I highly respect that each person finds their way, and there's different strokes for different folks, as the saying goes. But I really believe in the magic and the impact, the incredible efficacy of the somatic work to support people through their nervous systems, especially people who experience chronic illness. So that is the first thing. Blind spots, the things that we cannot see about ourselves, the things we don't know, and therefore we cannot support. And so if you're listening to me talk and you're like, maybe I do have some blind spots, then this might be, unfortunately, where a practitioner comes in hand. I know that that's not always accessible for everyone, but if you can afford some external help from someone who works in this niche, it's all very well going to a functional medicine practitioner who sees all different types of clients, or a nutritional therapist who sees all different types of clients. But unless that person is regularly seeing people like you, they might just not have the level of skill that is required to evaluate your case and also to support your case. So I would suggest finding somebody who does work in this space. And I appreciate that not everybody can afford to spend a lot of money on practitioner fees. I have done another episode where I talk about healing on a budget and some alternative ways you can maybe get some support. And although it's not exactly the same as working with a one-on-one practitioner, for a very reasonable price of £39 plus VAT a month, you can join my membership. And there's a lot of information there, and granted, you have to work through it in your own time. But we do have group calls for support. And even if it just gives insight into one or two blind spots that could shift the needle forwards for you, it may definitely be worth the investment. So that is number one. Let's move into number two. So the second thing that I see that gets in the way of people's healing and recovery is what I call the scattergun approach. So the scattergun approach is when people are just a little bit all over the place in terms of how they are supporting themselves. People who experience chronic illness generally tend towards having what we call an unstable system or unstable physiology, an unstable nervous system. And this instability is what gives them poor resilience and poor stress tolerance. So the very first objective when I'm working with anyone is to help them find more stability in their system. That is stability in their physiology, and that is stability in their nervous system, and that is also stability in life. Better sense of routine, a better sense of structure, and also just confidence and trust that what they're doing is supporting them. So the first step is to find structure and stability, which is the opposite of the scattergun approach. So we need to do things that are going to help the system stabilize. And that's why I created the Foundational 5. So the Foundational 5 is my methodology, which highlights the 5 things that I feel are most important to achieve this objective of stability. And they are, very briefly, the nervous system, blood sugar, sleep, pacing, and managing inflammation in the body. When we can focus on these 5 components, granted that we might need to start with one at a time, this is when we achieve a better sense of stability in the overall system. And then the body is maybe ready for deeper work and more complex protocols like digestive protocols or gut detox or, whatever the things are that people are doing. What I see in practice is that people can lack consistency. So they start one thing, and then because that one thing isn't necessarily working or they don't feel a difference within a couple of weeks, they drop that thing and then they start something else. And speaking to this idea of chasing the blind spots, sometimes if something isn't working, there can be this tendency to then say, this thing isn't working. I must have missed something. What else is wrong with me? Do I have Lyme? Do I have mold? Do I have heavy metals? Do I have this thing or that thing? And that can be very dysregulating and further destabilizing for the nervous system. So we need to pick a thing and stick with it. And that's why I created the Foundational 5, is because those are the things that, irrespective of if they make you feel noticeably better or not, you need to pick and stick so that you are creating the foundations of stability. Sometimes creating stability doesn't mean that we feel better. It just means that we don't continue to feel worse. And then once we have stability, we have an opportunity to layer on further things that improve our overall well-being and capacity. So in addition to the inconsistency, the other things that I see people doing are, as I said, picking things up, putting things back down again, perhaps doing things in the wrong order. So doing something that's more advanced or aggressive on the body before there has been the appropriate foundations laid to create resilience in the body. There might also be doing too much too soon. So even if you're working on the foundational 5, you're working through too many different changes at once. And that can be very overwhelming for a nervous system that's still trying to find stability. Might also be working into more complex and deeper trauma before the body is ready. It might also be some sort of just a disorganized approach, doing too much, things in the wrong order, things which are too aggressive, all of which, as you can probably gather, is very taxing for a nervous system which is just trying to survive. So our goal is, as we build more stability in the body, what we're really trying to do is create a greater sense of embodied safety. Yes, through the nervous system, but also through more stable physiology and more stable routines. And then as we create the stability, we can add the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But sometimes people want to jump the gun, and then they start doing things before the body is ready. And then they crash, and then they try again, and then they crash. And it creates a vicious cycle of essentially boom and bust within the healing space. So if you're somebody who sort of has some resonance with the scattergun approach, the first piece of advice I would give you is to slow down. And sometimes slowing down can be incredibly uncomfortable. And then just to pick one thing. And if you don't know what to pick, always pick the nervous system. And with a close second, I would say blood sugar control. So hard to say because everyone is different. But slow down, pick one thing, be consistent with that thing. And then once you've been consistent enough and you feel ready for the next change, take the next step. And yes, it's slow, and yes, it's boring. Yes, there will still be ups and downs, but sometimes the fastest way we can get there is slowly. And it's taking these small and consistent actions to build more stability in the body, which when you look back over time, you'll be so grateful that you took the time to lay those foundations. So the third and final thing that I see that stops people from moving forward in their healing journey is resistance to the change. Healing happens when we begin to accept what is and let go of something that is no longer. And we cannot achieve something that we have never achieved before without becoming somebody new. And in my own journey, what I tried to do was not make my whole identity the identity of a sick person. I didn't want my illness to become my identity. But the mistake that I made was that I clutched too strongly to my old self. And in doing so, I held on to her beliefs, I held on to her behaviors, I held on to her dysfunctional patterns. And then that is something that kept me stuck for a good chunk of time. It wasn't until I realized that it wasn't about not having the identity of a sick person, but I needed to create the identity of someone new. I needed to create an identity of a healed self and move in direction of the healed self and leave the old self behind. And so this is something that I do see with clients, is that there can be this resistance to the changes that are required. And as I've said already, is that I really appreciate that this is the intelligence of the nervous system. It's not safe for me to change, is essentially what the nervous system is saying. And the nervous system will continue to say, it's not safe for me to change until we can begin to embody a greater sense of self-safety. And we don't do this by efforting. We don't do this with willpower. And we definitely don't do this by overriding and trying too hard. This is a soft and gentle process of allowing, of just allowing yourself first and foremost to be with the discomfort of doing things differently, taking the pressure off of yourself, and just showing up little by little and bringing a little bit more softness, bringing a little bit more gentleness, and bringing a little bit more self-compassion to the process. Of course, working on the nervous system specifically with somatic tools is what helps to facilitate this change. But the most important thing is that you get into this mindset of just showing up and doing the work without any expectation. And then little by little, what you'll notice is some of the things that you used to do have now changed, have now shifted, are so much easier to implement, not because you efforted and tried so hard, but because you gave space for the shifts to happen. And so that is where the Nurturing Resilience membership can be really helpful. And we have a whole course dedicated to the nervous system. And I've really seen as people go through this course, some of the beautiful changes and shifts that are happening. Yes, we need to learn how to support ourselves with the stress of being chronically ill day to day. And that's what the course is designed to help you do. But as you practice again and again, what I'm seeing is that the way that people treat themselves changes and the way that people respond to their lives changes. And that's something that we can't force. That's something that needs the space and the support to naturally unfold. So those are the 3 things that I wanted to cover today. And I hope if you're feeling stuck in your journey that there's been something here for you, whether it is just a small little thing that you can do differently or a big thing that you've suddenly realized that you really want to pay attention to. Whatever it is, I hope there has been something here which is helpful for you. And if you do want more support on your journey, I think that this podcast will publish in November, December time. Not 100% sure. Things do get shifted around. But at this point in time, which is September, I am taking on new one-on-one clients if that's something that you're interested in. And then, of course, I have my Nurturing Resilience membership, which is £39 a month. You can join and cancel at any time. But it's a way to get some more support, especially if money is tight and you are struggling financially in your journey. So if you've enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could leave a review or a rating. If you have the time to share it with someone in your community who may find it as supportive as you have, I would be very grateful. And I will see you in the next episode.